Hey everybody, it's Helen Hillix, your host of From My Heart to Yours, licensed therapist, intuitive counselor. And today I want to talk about the male ego and sacred sexuality. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I'm not going to be blaming men for things that they have chosen to do. I'm not going to be bashing men in any way. I'm going to be looking honestly at what men are taught in our society and in our world today about how they should behave and what's important and how they should treat women and all the things that men are taught, and that it's a societal issue. It's not an individual male issue. I want to make that perfectly clear from the beginning. And I want to say that things are changing. Things are changing. Things are getting better. The male ego is being guided, sometimes in a very negative way, I have to say, and sometimes in a loving way. Let's start off with talking about what is happening in our world and what has happened for actually thousands of years regarding male domination. Men have dominated the world for all those years. Men have been in power. It's only the last few years, really. I can't believe that it was in the 1900s that women got to vote. I mean, that just blows my mind. But it shows you how quickly things have evolved since then. So let's start off with the reality that men have dominated women and the world for as far back as we can remember. Now, I'm not saying that there were never any female leaders. Of course, there were. There have been a few female monarchs and so forth in the ancient times or in the 1800s or whatever. But in general, men have dominated the world, and things are changing now, but that is a fact. And what has that led to? What have men learned about sacred sexuality, for instance? Not much. That's not been part of the repertoire that men were taught as men growing up. That's just not what they were taught. Men were not taught that intimacy and depending on their female partner was a beautiful, wonderful, and strong thing to do. That's not what men were taught. Men were taught to compete. And if you're not a big man and you're a short man or small man, then you're taught you've got to compete in some other way. And as a counselor, I'm going to tell you that working with men who are not large has taught me so much about the frailty of the male ego and how men are taught that if you're not a big man, then you are less of a man. It's so sad. And yet that's the truth. Men are taught that they should be big, that they should be strong, that they should be aggressive, that they should be competitive, that they should be dominating, they should be leaders. And they are not taught that what they really need is the same thing women need, and that is connection. They are not taught that we are all connected in the oneness, that we are all part of the same essence of energy. We're not taught that. And it's interesting too, as women, we cannot blame men, because who were men raised by? Men were raised by women, weren't they? And women are also taught that, you should puff up the male ego so the men will go out there and make a living for you, so that men will go out there and protect us, so that men will go out there and sacrifice their lives on the battlefields, and the women can stay home and be taken care of. So women have played into this paradigm just as much as men. So that's why I'm saying I am in no way blaming men for the situation in the world. Women and men collaborated to co-create that. So I'm thrilled that it's changing now. And I also am so sad that men have been relegated to this kind of a role for so many decades and millennia, because it's a very lonely place to be. If you are competitive and feel like, your job is to be on top, that's a lonely place to be, because you are not taught to partner. And I am also not saying that there aren't any men who know how to partner. That it would be ridiculous too, wouldn't it? Some men have been able to break through that paradigm of the male ego and male domination, but it still lingers all around us and within us. And I will talk another time about what the female ego and the female's role has been, but today I'm starting with the male ego because I talked about it on a summit recently with Nancy Moonstar about male intimacy and what that means and what it takes. And this is the conversation we ended up having was all about the male ego and how detrimental it is, the way women treat men and the way men treat themselves, how detrimental it is in terms of establishing any real intimacy. And if you are a man and you have overcome some of these barriers to true intimacy, good for you. And you know what your job is? Your job is to help other men do the same. Your job is to confront your friends and your family members and your coworkers when you see them behaving in that way, that traditional old male ego puffed up way of being. It's your job to say, I wonder why you feel the need to do that. Or, I have found that it liberates me to get over all of that competitive thinking. So if you are one of the lucky ones, then spread the good word, guys. Spread the good word so that many other men can have that feeling of real intimacy that we all are craving. That whole thinking that, men believe this way and women believe that way. Well, there's truth to it because that's how we've been trained. But if we could get underneath our training, what is it that we're all longing for? Aren't we all longing to feel connected and safe and happy? It just makes me sigh to really focus on that aspect of it. And that's how it works, is when you really focus on what you truly need, it makes you sigh from relaxation. And when, just the words of competition and aggression and domination, it's like that makes me tense just even saying the words. But when I talk about connection and intimacy and relaxation and cuddling and partnering, all of those words make me feel relaxed, and I know they do you too. The problem is that our whole world is still focused on competition and domination. We're still focused on nationalism and fighting over oil rights and fighting over resources and who's going to dominate which part of the world. It's so unbelievably sad. But the reason I'm talking about it is because talking about it and raising our consciousness about it one person at a time can truly make a difference. Whether we're talking about climate change and those who are fighting to say, no, there is no such thing as, human impact on the climate, and then others who are saying, you're out of your minds. Look at Australia burning to the ground. It's like, that's all about competition rather than saying, what do we have in common? And again, whether it's the male leaders of the world or it's the male females within a marriage, it's still the challenge is to say, what do we really need? What do we really need as a human species? We need to thrive. We need mutual support. We need to honor each other's needs. We need to understand each other's needs. We need to use the Earth's resources wisely so that everyone can benefit. And when we talk about getting out of the male ego, that is what we're talking about, is shifting over to the paradigm of what is for the highest good of all, instead of, what is for me, what is my own gratification. One of my clients recently was talking about a course she took where they were comparing relational joy and gratification. And our world is so focused on gratification, and ego gratification, rather than on what a wonderful experience it is to relate to one another and to feel the mutual support of relational joy. And whether you're talking about an individual relationship of a man and a woman, or two men or two women, or whatever, uh, uh, beyond gender, non-binary couples, however you identify. If you're talking about the mutual support, what's for the highest good of all, whether you're talking about a couple or you're talking about nations, it's really the same principles. It's time that we began to support one another, to really look deeply. And that's what it takes. It takes us to stop and evaluate what we're doing, to really take a look inside and to challenge ourselves. Is this really what I want? Is this making me happy? And, we're talking about the male ego today, and it's the same thing. Again, whether you're talking about an individual male ego or you're talking about the male ego of the entire human species, it's the same challenge, is to look deeply and say, is this what I want in my relationship? Is this what I want in the world? Is this what I want for my children? It makes me sad. I could cry right now thinking about it, because we are destroying the earth. And so many of us are destroying our relationships because we don't understand the male ego, and we either bash it or we puff it up. And that's another point I'd like to make, is that the Me Too movement, while absolutely necessary to challenge the domination of men and their belief that they can sexually dominate women for their own gratification, absolutely a necessary movement. But wouldn't it be great if we could have some compassion and realize that these men are merely behaving from the paradigm that they were taught, and that is the male-dominated world. It's not their individual faults, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be held individually accountable, but I'm saying let's have compassion for the reality that these men did not grow up in a society that honors women, that respects women, that admires women, and that teaches mutual support and what is for the highest good of all. So let's not bash men for how they were taught, and let's not also puff them up and try to hold on to that 1,000-year-old paradigm that men are the only ones worthy of being leaders, and that men should be the leaders of everything. Let's not hold on to that either, because that just makes for bad relationships, guys. It makes for bad relationships. It makes for women who feel submissive and afraid to say what they want sexually, afraid to say what they want in life, afraid to be who they are, afraid to show their own leadership skills and qualities. So let's take that first step of being accountable to look deeply at what we're doing on the collective level and on the individual level. Take a look at what you're doing in your own home. Take a look at the lessons that you're teaching your own children. Take a look at the dynamics between you and your partner and see if they are the dynamics that you truly spiritually believe are for the highest good of all, including each individual, because that's a unifying spiritual principle that will take us where we want to go. And that is a world in which we are all healthy, a world in which we're all safe, a world in which we're all happy to learn, and we are given the resources to learn, to be healthy, to be mutually supportive, to enjoy sacred sexuality, to see our children thrive, to be able to recreate and learn and grow all the days of our lives. That's what we all want for ourselves, and we all want that for each other. The world of competition, dominated by the male ego, it reminds me of something I read recently about patriotic millionaires, about this group of multimillionaires that are acknowledging that they should be taxed more so that they can help support equality on earth. And one of these multimillionaires was saying that when there is such financial inequality, the people who are the richest are always uneasy because they realize that they are so outnumbered by people who have so little, and that those people could take away what they have any moment. It's a very awful feeling when there is an inequity in the power differential. And it's the same thing within a relationship. If the male is dominating and the female is submissive, then there is always that separation and that uneasiness that comes from that. So the only way that everybody's going to be happy is if everybody gets their needs met. And this is just as true in a family situation as it is in the workplace or in the political arena or in the global arena. So let's bring it back to our intimate relationships, that if we can take on really looking at what supports us all and really looking at how the male ego has been trained to do the opposite of creating an environment of intimacy and safety and relaxation for themselves or with their partners. If we can really look honestly at that and begin to reconstruct ourselves, this is the basis of evolution, guys. We don't have to stay stuck in the past. You can get the support you need to be able to move beyond those old paradigms so that you're not dominated by the male ego or the female ego, so that we're not dominated by anything other than higher consciousness. And I don't want to say it that way, really. It's not that we're being dominated by higher consciousness. We're not being guided by anything other than higher consciousness. We're not being guided by the male ego that wants to compete and dominate and separate, or the female ego that wants to people please and placate. So we're not being guided by any of that. We are being guided by the principles that actually work. And that is the principle of doing what's for the highest good of all, including each individual. And if we can own that we can change ourselves, we can throw off that learning that comes from, millennia of mistaken beliefs and traditions that don't work anymore. If we can own that we are powerful enough to get the support we need to throw off those old ways of thinking, we can have that deep, passionate intimacy that we want in our loving relationships and our romantic relationships. Because you can't have sacred sexuality if you're trying to puff up the male ego. You can only have sacred sexuality if you feel passionate and safe and relaxed and connected deeply. Then you can have all the fun, excitement, passion, and safety of real sacred sexuality. And it becomes the foundation of everything you do, that feeling that what we do, we decide together. What we create, we decide together. What we are committed to, we decide together. Then you feel relaxed in every endeavor of your life, whether you're talking about sacred sexuality or the way you behave at work or how you raise your children. It's all the same. It's something that we co-create together based on what's for the highest good of all. And I want to challenge you today to take that thinking on, to take it on, to reevaluate where you are and what you're doing in your own life, and to offer this kind of thinking to your partner and have a conversation about it and see where it leads. That's it for today, guys. I love you, and I will talk to you next week.